One morning, when my friends and I, suffering from a hangover, were walking from our friend's apartment to the central station, we did not pay much attention to it. Suddenly, angry tweets and quick footsteps are heard behind us. Suddenly, right next to us, this black man shoots a wad of money with a shotgun and speaks loudly. He didn't put me on the bus. There was nothing I could do. You just had to do it. I had to take him away. It corresponds to our walking speed. Then he turns to us and says, "Yeah, I just had to take him away, you know how it is." And my friend comes back and says, "Yeah, go crazy, dude." The man nodded approvingly and finally walked past us. When a seemingly crazy person asks for confirmation, you casually support them, whatever it is. I'm sitting at a long traffic light, and another car stops next to me. Others share the awkward tension that comes from being particularly interested in the carvings on the steering wheel, fiddling with the air conditioner, or slightly tilting their heads to the beat of a non-existent radio, as they are not too advanced. In the middle of the intersection, a pigeon falls from the sky and immediately attracts the attention of both of us. It's almost a pleasant entertainment. The pigeon looks a little disheveled and confused, like a drunk person in a moment of enlightenment. He takes a few steps in one direction, then turns his head and walks in the other direction. Carried away by this strange episode, we did not notice how the car drove into the intersection. The pigeons didn't notice either. In the last seconds, he panicked and spread his wings to fly away. Change. He bounced like a toy dog off the radiator grill under the car. He disappeared from view for a moment, which is why, if it were a movie, there would be music in which Hallelujah stopped for a moment, holding her breath before screaming or being scared. Easement. There was a pigeon. It looked like it was still drunk, and a few feathers had fallen out. He continued as if nothing had happened, confused, trying to decide which direction would lead him to the greatest happiness. Rinse and repeat. And by that, I mean that another car drove up and the event happened again. Change. The only difference was that Mr. Pigeon was a little more prepared this time and seemed to be able to escape. Thus, he apparently turned over the hood of the car and drove along the side of the road, landing obliquely like a feather, and headed towards his opponent. And, thus, he left the intersection. The light turned green, and it was still just my car and the guy next to me. And even though the traffic light turned green, we turned around and looked at each other in disbelief. What did that freak I just saw do?" He said, "I think it's a good idea." About 10 seconds later, an eternity after we stopped using the traffic lights, I stepped on the gas and drove on. I've thought about this event at least 4 or 5 times since it happened, about 8 years ago. I wonder if the other guy remembers that. It was an emotional roller coaster. I lived in Marin County. I ate white bread with vanilla, and there was no fried chicken. If I had to go to the Auckland airport, I would drive a few miles in the opposite direction and buy chicken church style. In this establishment, there was bulletproof glass between the dining area and the cash register. Remember, this is not at all like my normal daily life. On my first visit in 2 years, the man behind the counter, honestly, said, I remember you. You're the white guy who came here," and he remembered my orders. I was waiting for a friend to take him to class, and while I was waiting, some guys got into my car and stared at me. I stared at him, and before he left, we were trapped in a cold stare for a good 10 seconds, and I continued to wait for my friend. It happened about a month ago. When this woman sat next to me and started chatting, I was sitting at Jack in a Box eating cheap tacos. I've been asked several times to change something other than the specific Jack in a Box so I'm trying to figure out what this woman wants from me. It was a stripper who was supposed to take her stripper friend home after she had a breast augmentation, but for some reason her friend couldn't do the procedure right away, so she ran away, leaving the stripper I was talking to at home. It was a rainy day outside, so she took shelter in a jack-in-the-box. When I finally ask if she wants to get on the bus or change her clothes, she answers, "I just want to give you a sermon." Then she takes out this well-worn Bible, reads the passage, forgives and begins to discuss the topic relevant to her situation. I'm not sure if she worked as a stripper during the week and a Sunday school teacher on weekends, but she was pretty good at teaching the Bible. After a 10-minute lecture, her stripper friends run up and squeal, and she thanks them for taking the time to listen to her. Of course, her stripper's name was Faith. This guy was very funny. At midnight, I was in a small restaurant. These guys, who looked like Jamaicans, came up, looked around and just stared at me. After they ordered the food, they sat down next to me. There were a lot of empty tables, so I felt weird and a little worried. One of them said, I was the only one who smiled at him as he walked. And he started stroking my beard in a strange way. I was so close to flinging his hand away from my face. To be honest, I do not know why I did not do it. They started talking to me about life, as if I went to school, about what I wanted to do, about hobbies, for example, about family troubles. After talking to them for about 30 minutes, I realized that they are actually pretty cool people. They told some crazy stories from their lives about traveling around the United States. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're inviting me to their place. I like YOLO's lifestyle, and I agreed with his suggestion. When I go there, their place is filled with the most unusual and cool works of art and paintings. One guy goes to bed, and the other tells me some story hidden behind some fragments, and he goes crazy about it. He gave me tarot card reading. What else are you going to do? Without going into details, it reveals my innermost thoughts about how I feel about life and what I want to do, and how my current situation affects me. He told me that I had to leave, which I had been planning to do for a while. I felt a real connection with him when he told me to be with me in my decision. There was a sincere note in his voice, and then he took out a basket full of stones and crystals that he had collected from all over the world. After I dug into them, one of the crystals caught my attention. It was really clean and I felt relaxed when I picked it up. He told me that if I chose him, I would keep him. He said it gives me peace and protects me when I need it most. He directed several French films, and while the screening was going on, we just discussed and criticized the film and said that we liked it. It was about 6 a.m. when I left. The sun has just begun to rise. I thought a lot about what happened on the way home, and after 8 months I broke up with all my friends and family to make my dreams come true. I don't think he would have worked so hard to achieve his goal without this guy. Once I didn't know who a black man was who was walking down the street and talking loudly. Hi, Whitey, I don't think so. I replied, I'm sure it's almost the same. We go to work, eat and try to sleep with women. You're right about that, he said and left. The end of the story. One day in San Francisco, a crazy black woman walks down an alley. She has children with cancer, and she says to my face, "Hi, this is amazing." It's also surprisingly fun. I was at the cinema recently, and while my friend was buying popcorn, I sneezed at the same time as the guy sitting next to me. No one at the cinema noticed, but we knew that this must have happened to me before. I was at the grocery store and went to buy an onion. All the bulbs were huge, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. I laughed a little and just kept looking at the bow. Another woman came in and said, these are huge bulbs. I agreed and started laughing. She started laughing. We both stood looking at the giant onion and laughed. This went on for several minutes, until each of us took one, nodded to each other and went our separate ways. We were best friends for 20 hours until we met another girl at the airport and flew from California to the Midwest. We casually complained to each other that our connecting flight was delayed by 2 hours. Then we finally found out that we were sitting next to each other on both flights. When we finally arrived at the second airport for the next flight, we found that it had been cancelled. That's why we overcame all the difficulties with rebooking together. Together we agreed on a change of airline and looked at each other's luggage. We covered for each other for about 13 hours at the airport, watched Disney movies on Netflix together, ate fast food and sweets. Then, after our last flight, we said goodbye and never spoke again. Single friends. I live in Texas, and some of our parks have wonderful cave systems. I was with a group of friends and foolishly decided to go my own route. I jumped from a small ledge onto a small wasteland. Some random guy was sitting there eating a sandwich. We talked for a few minutes, and I asked, "So how do we get out of here?" This guy speaks in the softest tone in the world. I've been trying to figure this out for a while now. So I decided to have lunch. After about 30 minutes, we found a way out. But let me be clear, I thought I was going to die in this stupid situation. I was flying to the old Hong Kong airport. We used to fly right through buildings and land. Suddenly, at the airport, we found ourselves in the center of the city. It was raining. The plane was rocking from side to side. I look out the window, and through the rain I see lights on the glass, and it seems to me that they are higher than the plane. The plane is going up and down in reverse. I'm scared. People scream every time the plane bounces. The man next to me, who slept through the first stage of the flight and drank the second, was wearing a pilot's uniform. I think he was German. I'm sure he'll look out the window, finish his drink and wink at me with a smile. An Englishman. An American. The plane crashes again. I'll tell you the secret of this flight, okay? He looks around as if he might be heard, and says, I've always had trouble with something in the simulator. He was laughing at our company, gnawing on ice and humming something to himself when we landed. I slapped the ass of a gay man who mistook me for his boyfriend at the checkout. Several guys in the public library heard obscene moans, and the guy next to him was taking tests online. We just looked at each other, realizing the degree of awkwardness and shyness of our current situation. We understand that the level of awkwardness and shyness of our current situation is a mutual human understanding, which is quite strange in its own way. I walked up to my buddy Vince at the mall from behind, leaned into his ear and whispered, Do you want me to pat my boobs? It wasn't Vince. I rode the Tower of Fear in Orlando on a school trip. I was sitting next to a very large and intimidating-looking black gentleman. When the drops started to fall, he screamed like a little girl, grabbed my hand and squeezed it tightly. Then we met each other's eyes and nodded understandingly at each other, like men. What a beautiful and heartfelt story. Leaving the party at the same time as this girl, we were not in the best area, so we silently stayed a few steps away from each other. And when a group of guys came around the corner and started yelling at her, we both held hands and pretended to be dating. And yet, what makes me admire the freaks is that when we passed them about half a block away, one of them shouted, Hey, you're just Lois. Peter Griffin had definitely never heard of it. But we held hands until I led her into her building. In my freshman year of college, I studied late at night in the library while living in a dorm. I ate mostly beans and rice, which led to an abundance of sweets. The room I was in was empty, so I immediately farted. Unfortunately, the room was not empty. On the other side of the room, there was a rather handsome guy who was clearly listening to me and trying to suppress the monarch's laughter. I ignored him because I was too embarrassed to say anything. About 20 minutes later, I heard a soft beep from his side of the room. There was a slight smile on his face, but he didn't say anything. After a while, he got up to leave and said, You have a nice weekend. Before leaving, I never saw him again. From time to time, I wonder what my fart buddy is doing and how he's telling this story. Oh, young love. I used to work at a hotel, and one day I was talking to a guest. He said he was a paramedic many years ago. He started telling me about a really tragic car accident that killed 2 children. He said it was something he would never forget. I told him that many years ago I was in a car accident and both my sisters died, but it happened in another state. He immediately asked me if it was a specific city in a neighboring state, and that was it. He even remembered which part of the city it was. I was relieved. Almost 20 years later, I will meet with one of those who reacted to the car accident I was in. I was stopped by a traffic light on my bike, and pedestrians were also walking next to me to wait at the traffic light. Just when the light was supposed to turn green, a car pulled up and stopped in front of both of us in 1 second. We both looked out the window and saw a seat with a teddy bear. An adult man was sitting at the wheel and buckling the passenger seat. The light turned green. The car burned down. We looked at each other and I said, I'm glad someone else can see it. Maybe he just wanted to get into oncoming traffic. My favorite case was when I was flying to a full-time graduate school. I have submitted an application. It was February, it was snowing, and they kept canceling flight after flight. When they arrived at midnight, they informed all of us, about 6 or 7 people, that the next flight was on Sunday. It was actually Friday. The meeting was on Saturday. It didn't work out, and I wasn't the only one who was upset. Together we rented a minibus and drove through a snowstorm at an average speed of 9 miles per hour to our destination, which was about 4 hours away. The woman who volunteered to drive missed her daughter's 13th birthday, and thought she'd be damned if she'd arrive 1 minute later. We all talked and shared stories until we ran out of gas, but silently agreed without saying that none of us would fall asleep because one of us couldn't sleep, and thanks to this experience, I met a guy from the same department who still remains one of my close friends. At least once a year we remember what a strange and intense experience it is. I was on a cruise in Alaska and talked to this woman. She asked where I was from, and I talked to her from Cleveland. And she replied that she had a cousin who lived in the suburbs of Cleveland. I asked which one, and it turned out that her cousin lived across the street from me, and I knew her and her family. I used to often go to land centers on weekends, just have fun with friends, play CS and much more. Anyway, one evening we went there and most of the computers were busy, so my friend went to look for one, and I was sitting next to a guy who looked normal and good enough. Oh, how wrong I was. I played around a bit when I looked in to see what this guy was doing. To my horror, he saw one of the most obscene scenes I've seen since my days as a director. Soon his phone rang. He answers, and it becomes clear that this is his girlfriend. When he starts talking, he tells her that he is busy at work and will be home soon. Keep talking about how much he misses her, how much he loves her, etc. Pleasuring the horse with his oral skills while watching the young woman. He quickly hung up the phone, and I admire the carelessness with which young teenagers often view an animal in public places. I think he got bored with a vain BJ, so he started looking for more, and I can see his Google entry out of the corner of my eye. The search phrase he chose was incest, bestiality. To this day, I still wonder if he wanted to see how the animals he participated in would be freed by humans, or if they were freed by humans, then the animals he participated in. I am sure that this thought will eventually lead to an aneurysm. Finally, he gets up and goes to the bathroom, probably jerking off, and I make eye contact with the person sitting across from him. I'm sure he saw almost everything I was doing too. He's looking at me with such a terribly confused look that I'm trying to realize that this freak we just saw came back, packed up his things and left. We both left them completely stunned. I just got back to watching my Guafurry hent, and thank God I don't have any weird fetishes. A strange funny man.